Hello and welcome to La Course en Tête's coverage of the 2021 Vuelta a España, the final Grand Tour of the season, brought to you by Peloton magazine and the Belgian Waffle Ride. My name's Jeremy Whittle. I'm sitting in for the exuberant OJ Borge, whose exuberance for this podcast is such that he has now gone on holiday for a few days. Well, somehow we will soldier on without him. Paolo, let's have a tune. I am joined by the recently freed Sophie Smith, now back home in Melbourne, Australia, after weeks of detention, monitoring and PCR testing. Hello, Sophie. How does it feel to be free at last?
Well, I've come back into another lockdown, but as I was saying off air before, at least now I could have a glass of wine and I can do a bit of exercise. Not that I've done the latter because it is proper winter in Melbourne still and it's been non-stop raining since I've returned, but I have got stuck into the wine. I won't lie.
I mean, we need to try and work out how much time you spent in resilience, detention, testing, and lockdown over the past 2 months, don't we? How many hours and days? Because it's a long time, isn't it?
Yeah, it was 15 days in Darwin, and then technically I'm back in lockdown in Melbourne, so I don't know if that counts. And then I did 5 days in the UK, so
wow,
almost a month.
Wow.
Yeah.
Also keeping us company is the Alejandro Valverde of podcasting, the evergreen veteran Peter Cossins, who as usual is stroking a white cat in his mountain lair hidden somewhere deep in the Pyrenees. Hello, Pete. How's things with you?
I'm very good, Jeremy. No, there's no white cat there. There's a brown dog. He's very cuddly. I'm stroking him.
Doesn't sound quite as threatening or scary. But yeah, so obviously the main topic for our conversation this week is the Vuelta. It's rest day in Spain as we sit down to record this. The Vuelta's initial blows have been struck, and after last Sunday's mountain finish to Alto de Velafike, it would appear that it's a two-horse race, with the unflappable Primož Roglič, predictably, and an informed Enric of Movistar, now expected to fight it out on the road to Santiago de Compostela, where the Vuelta finishes in 2 weeks' time. But it can't really be that sorted already, can it? I mean, Pete, Sophie, there have to be more twists and turns to come. Are we being too hasty, do you think?
I think there's going to be some twists and turns. There's no doubt about that. As far as Roglič goes, it's been interesting watching him because he just looks kind of so on top of his form, so on top of his rivals, unflappable, as you mentioned. It just looks like he's kind of cruising to victory. But of course, we've seen this before. We saw it in Paris-Nice at the start of this year. We've seen it at the Tour de France. Or the Tour de France, we didn't really get a chance to see it, but we saw him crash out there. I mean, we've seen him in stage races last year where he crashed out when he seemed to be going well. And really, I think that's the only thing that's going to derail Roglič at the moment. Some piece of misfortune, getting caught in a crash, falling sick perhaps. I mean, you can't really see anybody beating him on at the road at the moment, although I wouldn't say that's for certain, but he's definitely the favourite.
I think Roglič himself is, I agree with Pete, his sort of composure is, you can't really see him losing it, but I think at the back of his mind he is very conscious that has also happened to him before. And I would never say, I know there's a trend that this was, or it certainly was the case at the Tour de France this year, that Grand Tours are one and done in the first week. I think it's always interesting to see how people come out of that first rest day, because that's when fatigue really sets in and they settle a bit more into the race. And the top five, in terms of time anyway, on paper, is still relatively close with what's to come. But as well as Roglič being on form and very relaxed, I remember when he first came into the Grand Tour scene, like his first Tour de France, he was so tense. It was like getting blood out of a stone in terms of interviews. But he's matured a lot since then.
He definitely seems all the interviews that I've seen him give so far, he definitely seems much more kind of at ease in that environment. You know, he seems a lot less kind of stiff with the media and easygoing and making a few jokes and stuff as well. And I've never seen him look as assured as he does. I mean, he's looked, you know, he's got that kind of style where he always where he looks very stoic and he doesn't seem to suffer very much, and he looks pretty unflappable, as I keep saying. But I've never seen him look quite so calm.
Yeah, I think it's his team as well. Like his team just seems to have that reading between the lines, if you like, from what different writers have said of the first week. They just seem to have a really good good level of camaraderie around them. They seem to have, they're all on the same page in terms of what they want to do. They're writing for Roglič. There was an interview with Sepp Kuss the other day where he was also talking about communication, and he was really clear on their strategy, saying that they don't, they're here to win the race. They're not that fussed on stage wins, whether you believe that or not. Tadej Pogačar said the same thing at the Tour and then won 2 stages in the Pyrenees. But I think those combination of things, having a clear direction, being really open with communication, they're actually 2 traits that Ineos Grenadiers have always really prided themselves on, and their Grand Tour history speaks for itself. So I think the team in general, as well as Roglič, is quite confident, and that often breeds success.
I mean, I must admit that while I like watching Enric Mas race, because I think he looks great when he's accelerating up the climbs. He's got a really lovely style, very elegant style. His upper body hardly moves. He looks really good when he's going up a steep mountain. I've never felt that convinced by him as a Grand Tour contender, even though he's had a series of high placings in Grand Tours. But he looks more the part than he's ever looked. And if he and López, who are talking a good game at the moment, if they can keep their collectivity together, which is always a big question mark with a Movistar team, can we really believe that they're tactically astute enough to defeat Roglič? Especially if Valverde isn't there, who was always their kind of, I guess, the guru of what the team should be doing in terms of tactics.
I mean, I guess there's 2 ways to see Valverde's loss. I mean, obviously he's hugely experienced. He's kind of the iconic figure in the team. He does give them something, that kind of reassurance, perhaps. But at the same time, without him there, it then kind of really puts the pressure on Mas and Miguel Ángel López to kind of step up and to be leaders. And I think that's what we've seen in the last few days since Valverde crashed out. I mean, on stage 9, they really. I mean, although other teams did try and attack and put Roglič and Jumbo-Visma under pressure, notably Ineos, it was Movistar who really kind of took the battle to them in the end, with both Mas and López attacking. They seemed to play off each other quite well. It was almost like, I don't know, seeing a strike during a football game or something. They just seem to know naturally when to stop and when to go, and when the other person was going to go. And if we can see more of that in the next few days, I mean, what we mustn't forget, I mean, Mas is at the moment is 28 seconds behind Roglič, and López is about 120 back. They've got to get ahead of López at some point, because there's a time trial on the last day, 34 kilometres. They're both going to lose time to him then. So it's not just a case of kind of dropping him somewhere and gaining a few seconds. They need to be a couple of minutes ahead of him, and they need to work together to find that time if they can.
I mean, Sophie, do you think? I mean, it seems hard to believe, doesn't it? With the Movistar documentary that the infamous Movistar documentary that everybody watched, where we saw how conflicted the team could be, or how chaotic the team even could be at times. It's hard to imagine them defeating Roglič, isn't it, really?
Confession time. I think I might be the only person on the planet that's not watched that documentary. So
let's tell you what happens.
I have to go and do my homework. I've not over the years had a heap to do with the Movistar team, because there is admittedly a bit of a language barrier. My Spanish isn't up to scratch. I guess there's another motivating factor here, that it is their home Grand Tour, as well as, like, I remember the first time I went to, without cultural stereotyping, the first time I went to a Spanish national team press conference at the World Championships, it was like, I've not seen anything like it. It was like being at a Sunday barbecue. It's just journalists and writers all sat around in a circle, and they were just yelling across the room at each other. There was no sort of formality to it. So I don't know if that's a cultural aspect as well. The thing with the Movistar that's always struck me is just their team tactics, because there are some times where I'm not even sure if there across what they're doing, or it is, as you say, like very disorganized. I remember at the Tour a few years ago, I was speaking to Miguel Lander, and the team had come in saying we have, I don't know, 10 leaders, 3 leaders, and we all have aims to win the yellow jersey. And on day 4, they were talking about winning the team's classification. So I'm never sure. I would never weigh in as an expert on Movistar tactics, but I mean, they're obviously doing something right to be sitting 1-2 on general. 2-1 on 2-3 even on general classification after the first week. So things have changed, and you know, maybe with what's happened to Valverde, you get some of the younger guys who are starting to call the shots on the road, and it takes them into a new direction. I don't know.
The Belgian Waffle Ride is the biggest gravel race in North America, with 4 venues across the US. The BWR, as it's known, was created as an homage to the great one-day sprint classics of Europe and is defined by long courses that are punctuated by a myriad of off-road sectors. I love an off-road sector. The most unique cycling event in the country, the BWR features a party-like atmosphere on and off the bike, with Belgian feasting before and after. With a long day on the bike between, you can learn more about these crazy events at belgianwaffleride.bike. And I demand at some point in the future to be there for waffles and riding.
So let's cast our eyes over the top 10 then as things stand. We've got race leader Primož Roglič leading by 28 seconds from Enric Mas and 1 minute 21 from Miguel Angel López, Mas's teammate. In 4th, we've got Jack Haig from Bahrain Victorious at 1:42. 5th, Egan Bernal at 1:52. And then 6th place, Adam Yates at 2:07. 7th, Giulio Ciccone of Trek Segafredo at 2:39. Sepp Kuss, Roglic's teammate, at 2:40. Felix Großschartner at 3:25. And David de la Cruz of UAE Team Emirates at 3:55. Now, I guess you would both agree that we would have to think, wouldn't we, with the time trial over 30 kilometres closing the race, which is bound to favour Roglic, that anyone more than 2 minutes off Roglic now, this is assuming, of course, that he doesn't have one of his moments, anyone more than 2 minutes off Roglic now is only looking at podium at best. Would you both agree with that?
I think so, yeah. I mean, looking at the top 6 as it stands, I mean, Kuss is obviously going to be working for Roglic. I mean, he kind of drops and then comes back again depending on how much work he's got to do and how close he is to his leader at the end of a stage. Großschartner's dropping down the GC. De la Cruz is probably maybe good for, I think he finished 7th last year. Probably that'd be the range of his, the top range of his objectives. I mean, really, I think the top 6, Yates, Bernal, Haig, López, Mas, and then Roglic, working kind of in reverse order. They're the ones that are going to be looking at the podium. Ciccone maybe, if things work out, but I think it's between those 6.
Sophie, who do you think is still looking at winning of those top 6?
I think Ineos Grenadiers would still be thinking that they're a good shout, whether that's with Bernal or Yates. I'm not too sure. They came in with Yates, I thought, as the preeminent leader, so to speak, but I definitely would say, like your top, as Pete said, your top 5, top 6 there, they're also representing the strongest teams in the race at the moment. But I can't see that changing much either. Touch wood.
It's interesting looking at, we mentioned Yates there, and he was very active on the Verifique stage. I mean, he and the 2 Movistar guys are the most active riders. Roglic was doing a lot of chasing after all 3 of them. He was essentially working for Bernal. I mean, I read something in L'Equipe that morning saying that, I didn't realise this, so it could be wrong, but I mean, Dave Brailsford said at the start of this season that they had quite a simple strategy. Egan Bernal was going to be their leader for the Tour, for the Giro. Geraint Thomas is going to be leader for the Tour. Adam Yates is going to be the leader for the Vuelta. And the L'Equipe actually said that when it actually got close to the Vuelta, there was a possibility Yates actually dropped off the list of starters. There's a possibility he might not appear at all. I mean, it just seems odd that they kind of prepared him all the way through the season, and that might have happened. I mean, he still looks the strongest. He might be behind Bernal, but essentially that was because he was trying to drag Bernal up the Verifique the other day until the Colombian said, "Look, you ride your own race." So he looks the strongest guy for me, and Bernal just, I mean, just doesn't seem to have the form that he had in the Giro.
Before we get into what's going on with the Ineos Grenadiers big time, because I think it's been the subject of so much comment, both on websites, on social media, just in general, really what's going on with their Grand Tour ambitions. Before we do that, let's touch on Jack Haig, because he seems to be a bit of a sleeper up there in fourth place. I mean, he's still within a minute and 3/4 of the jersey of Roglič. He's not a bad time trialist. He's a decent time trialist. He's a great climber. What do we think about him? Is his performance catching the eye of the Australians at home?
It's not making mainstream news now, if I'm being honest, purely, but that's not a result of or a reflection on Jack Haig. He's a prodigious talent. His name's known in cycling circles and around and amongst general sports fans. I think this time of year in Australia, he's competing against grand finals of domestic footy codes and cricket sort of inkling its way back in. So cycling, unless, sadly for me, in terms of mainstream media, outside of specialty titles, he'd have to win a stage at this point, I think, or win the Vuelta for it to be front page news or of interest to more commercial networks. But I think it's an incredible performance for him in general, but also if you just consider that he's coming off the back of the Tour de France, where he had a really ugly crash at that race. So I think for him to come back with Bahrain as well, it's where he sits now is an indication. How he's ridden the first week is a proper indication of what his capabilities are.
It must be hard riding in a team where all your teammates go off in 70k lone breakaways all the time when they're supposed to be helping you to fight for the podium, because that's what Bahrain victorious have done all season, isn't it? It's just we saw it at Vellefico as well with Damiano Caruso, the latest of their team. Well, he did that in the Giro on the penultimate, the final major stage as well. But they seem to just specialise in these long lone breaks. And if Jack Haig's ambitions are more of a slow burn towards the podium at the end of the Vuelta, then that feels like it's a lonely road really for him.
Yeah, I think he's in a good position now. I mean, last week, I'll just remind OJ of this because I'm sure he's going to listen in. OJ actually tipped Mikel Landa as the overall winner of this race. And obviously,
I remember, yeah, he did, didn't he?
And
he doesn't listen to the podcast.
So and Landers was one of the major victims of the Vellefico stage. He lost 4 minutes on his GC rivals that day, kind of putting him at the contest basically. But Bahrain have still got a hugely strong team. I mean, you mentioned Caruso there. They've also got Gino Madero, who I think is just outside the top 10, maybe in 12th place. They've got Mark Padun and Wout Powles to help in the mountains as well. And of course, you've got to think now that Landa has got to help Haig. So Bahrain have got some. I mean, they've only got one card to play in Haig, I think, for the GC, but they've got a lot of riders who can support him. And I mean, as we saw with Caruso at the Giro, they could try kind of throw the Hail Mary, and somebody else goes off on a 70-kilometre break towards the end of the race. Who knows what they might try?
Yeah, it reveals a lot about the team's ambitions, really, doesn't it? When that happens, I always think that if you get one of their main mountain goats going off on those really long breaks, like 60, 70k, then you anticipate that they don't think they can win the race overall.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. But I mean, Haig's a really good shout for the podium. I think if one of the Movistar guys falls back, and you kind of think it might be López, given that Mas is closer to Roglič at the moment, then I mean he's only 21 seconds behind López at the moment. He could end up on the podium, which would be a great result for him. Like Sophie said, he had a horrendous crash in the first week of the Tour, and it's pretty amazing he's back in this kind of condition already.
Let's move on to what is perhaps, it's a running theme, isn't it? It's a running narrative through this Grand Tour season, particularly since the Tour de France. The greatest mystery of how, for the second Grand Tour running, Ineos Grenadiers have gone in with the multiple leaders, but yet again look unlikely to challenge for the win. The team that dominated the Grand Tour scene for almost a decade, and now they're again hoping that maybe they can clamber on to the podium in Santiago de Compostela when the Vuelta ends. They started this race with 2 Grand Tour champions among their leaders, Egan Bernal and Richard Carapaz. At least in Paris, at the end of the Tour, Carapaz was on the podium. But do we think they can repeat that result here? Because that's starting to look like their best hope. And surely this team, this is a question that Dave Bells has been asked and a lot of the riders have been asked, surely this team expects to be adding more Grand Tours, not merely finishing on the podium.
Ineos have actually had a really good week, but not at the Vuelta. They won at the Tour of Norway with Ethan Hayter, who completely dominated that race, a fantastic win. Over at the Tour de l'Avenir, which is the race where all the young riders compete against each other, Ineos's Carlos Rodriguez produced a phenomenal ride on the final stage to almost take victory, finished only 7 seconds away, having kind of ridden away up over I think it was the Petit Saint Bernard to take the stage win. And you kind of think, in the background, things are going well for them. They've got all this talent coming through. We've seen Tom Pidcock. They've got all these young riders. But at the top end, it's not happening to them, happening for them at all. And I mean, I know they've won the Giro, but at the Tour, where they obviously lost a lot of their leaders in crashes with setbacks and whatever, it just didn't work out for them at all. I mean, Carapaz kind of saved their bacon a bit there with a great ride to take third place. Here, their team is strong. I mean, you can see all the support riders are in great shape. And I mean, Dylan van Baarle's riding out of his skin tearing the red jersey group apart every day on the climbs. But the leaders, apart from Adam Yates, don't seem to have it. And Yates hasn't been kind of given the freedom that I was expecting him to have. I mean, I suppose the big mystery, I mean, we know that Carapaz has had a very loaded season. He's finished third at the Tour. He's then gone to Japan. He's won the gold medal at the Olympics. I mean, he was always down to ride the Vuelta, but it just seems a bit too much for him now, to having done what he has done. And I mean, I'm just expecting Yates to get a bit more freedom, and maybe that'll happen now, but it's almost a little bit too late for him, maybe.
I didn't anticipate Carapaz being anywhere near the podium in this race, purely because of what he's already done this season, as Pete mentioned. And you've got to factor in between it was a week turnaround between the Tour and the Olympics in 2 different continents as well. I think we've just become so accustomed over the last 10 years of, Ineos being the Grand Tour winning team. We just need to change that perception of them now. And I think I don't know if it's changed internally with the team as well. They're not the best Grand Tour team anymore. They're one of the best Grand Tour teams. And just because they're not winning the race like we're used to, they're still, as we said, they've won the Giro, they placed at the Tour, they're in podium contention, still at the Vuelta. So they're not necessarily having a bad season. They've not completely fallen off the shelf, so to speak. They're just not as dominant as they used to be. And I've kept saying this, and I'm sticking to it as well. They do seem to be in a process of rebuild. Like the team that we knew, that British core, they're pretty much gone, or they're close to retirement. And they're in this phase of bringing in new people or just working with leaders on the team who come from different cultural backgrounds, and also, as we've said in previous podcasts, from a managerial perspective as well. So I don't anticipate that we'll necessarily see this season, or maybe for the next few seasons, the team that we've become accustomed to for those reasons.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that's exactly the situation that they're in, and but it still feels like they are they're setting out their stall as, we are Grand Tour contenders, and it's this confusing situation where you've got, as I said at the start of that point, you've got 2 Grand Tour winners in their Vuelta team, yet neither of them look well. Obviously, Richard Carapaz is out of the picture now because he's nearly 10 minutes down, but Egan Bernal as well looks really lackluster. It's really odd, isn't it, to think that this is the guy who won the Giro and did that spectacular lone attack through the snow in that stage in the Dolomites as well, because he just looks a shadow of that rider. And you look at what else is going on in the sport with where the talent is gravitating to, and whilst they've got great riders there, and they've got younger talent coming through as well. And as you mentioned, Pete, they've had success in week-long stage races and other lesser stage races. They don't seem to be a Grand Tour team anymore.
Yeah, I think I don't think you can say they're not a Grand Tour team because of even this record. Even this year, their record's been good. But like Sophie said, they're just not performing as we'd expect them to, and I think that's more because everybody else has stepped up to their level rather than they've gone backwards. I mean, Roglič has improved over the last few seasons. We've seen that clearly. I mean, Pogačar's come in and he's been a sensation, and nobody can touch him. And I think there's a sense that if one or the other of those riders is in the race, it's going to be very difficult for any other team to come through and beat them if they're on form, if they're not going to suffer any kind of mishap.
Well, which was exactly the case with Bernal's winning the Giro, wasn't it? That they weren't there, and I mean, maybe he's the third best stage race rider at the moment, but the fact that they weren't there is also a telling point, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that. It's been interesting watching Bernal because he's been following all the attacks and not really been kind of right at the front end of the race himself, but never far away from it. And then I think even he was expecting on the Velofike to be more dynamic, to be more involved, and for whatever reason he didn't have the legs. I think they rode for him all day. They were clearly setting him up for an attack, and it just didn't happen. And I don't think it was a case of there was a back issue with the back issue that plagued him last year. I mean, one thing to remember about this Vuelta is it's been incredibly hot since the very start of the race, and I know that's been from reading and listening to what other riders have been saying, that's been a massive factor in terms of how it sat them. They're all really glad to get to the rest day, but looking ahead, I mean, it's not going to get any cooler in the next few days, and I mean, it could be that we'll see other riders, like, assuming that Bernal was affected by the heat, I don't know, but we'll see other riders suffering in the same way, I think.
Yeah, I still think they're one of the strongest teams in terms of Grand Tour racing, though. I'm there with Pete on that. You know, them and Jumbo-Visma are the only two teams that have had people on the podium at both Grand Tours so far this season, and that potentially could be the same thing at the Vuelta again this month.
I mean, that moves us on nicely to a theme we've touched on during the pod earlier this season, and also in our writing for La Course en Tête website, which is that has the game changed now in the last kind of actually probably since Pogačar's explosive win in the Tour over Roglič? Has the game changed to the extent that Roglič and Pogačar have to be not featuring in a race for riders like Bernal, Mas, López, the Yates twins, etc., to have any hope of winning? I mean, are we at that point where these two Slovenians are now so dominant that everyone else is just racing for second place if they're on the start line? Because it's starting to feel like that a little bit, isn't it?
I think so. At the moment, it's when Pogačar or Roglič ride, or if they both ride, you're immediately looking for one of them to win, for their teams to kind of to dominate the race. But I mean that could be a very fleeting thing. I mean, we've seen these things happen before. I mean, especially with a young rider like Pogačar coming through, you kind of, all this hype is loaded onto them, and then for whatever reason they kind of, I mean, he's won 2 tours and that's incredible, but that doesn't mean he's going to win 3 tours or any more. I mean, I would expect him to, but that doesn't mean he's going to. And of course, that's what all of his rivals will be clinging on to. That maybe there are issues. Maybe things won't go as smoothly for him in future seasons. I mean, he's dominant at the moment. That doesn't mean that he's going to be next year.
And I think, the general approach of teams in this younger riders seems to be a little bit different as well. Like again, like referring to Sepp Kuss, as I did earlier in the podcast, he was saying that I think it was stage 9. They kind of let Ineos do a lot of the work because they weren't necessarily interested in winning the stage. Their job was just to protect Roglič. So I don't know if it's the the two Slovenians are certainly two of the strongest riders in the peloton. I don't know if everyone's completely resigned finishing second, because I think if you look at the Tour anyway, and this Vuelta, there's less there seems to be less, the racing seems to be less organised, and that was something that came out of the Tour as well. People saying that there was less control than there would have been, you know, in Ineos Grenadiers was the single team on top, taking control of everything. So I think there's opportunities for other teams to come into. In terms of Pogačar's case, he seems to be singularly above everyone, at least when it comes to the Tour. But there's no reason, I don't think, why other teams couldn't take it to Jumbo-Visma, especially because they're open about what they do. They're open about how they're racing. It's just whether they've got the medal for it. But they don't. The peloton, I would say, from the people I've spoken to, doesn't seem to be wholly resigned to that being the fact.
The Belgian Waffle Ride is the biggest gravel race in North America, with 4 venues across the US. The BWR, as it's known, was created as an homage to the great one-day sprint classics of Europe and is defined by long courses that are punctuated by a myriad of off-road sectors. I love an off-road sector. The most unique cycling event in the country, the BWR features a party-like atmosphere on and off the bike, with Belgian feasting before and after. With a long day on the bike between, you can learn more about these crazy events at belgianwaffleride.bike, and I demand at some point in the future to be there for waffles and riding.
So looking ahead into the Vuelta's second act, Pete, what do you think of the highlights of the coming days? Are there any likely flashpoints that we should be watching for when we can see Roglič and Mas and the others hoping to make up lost ground?
I think it's going to be pretty quiet in the GC battle for probably until next weekend. I mean, the one caveat to that, or there's 2 caveats to that actually. The stage on Wednesday, stage 11 to Valdepeñas de Jaén, finishes up an extremely steep main street through the town, which people may remember. It featured in the Vuelta kind of about a dozen years ago, first of all. Igor Anton went up there. Igor Anton obviously being a great Basque climber. Then the next year, Joaquim Rodriguez won there. And then a couple of years after that, Danny Moreno won there. So it's always been won by a Spaniard, always won by a climber, and a punchy climber at that. And I think we're going to see a little bit of action towards the tail end of that stage. I mean, it's a finish that will really suit Roglič. It's really like the Mur de Huy, the last kilometre. And of course, Roglič was second in the Mur de Huy behind Julian Alaphilippe this year. So I could see him gaining a little bit of ground there, possibly. And then after that, we've got a lot of stages this week that are either going to be for the break. There's one definite one definite stage for the sprinters, stage 13, and then we get next weekend 2 pretty big mountain stages again. Starting on Saturday with the finish on a new finish on the Pico V Huercas, and then on the Sunday, riding through the Sierra de Gredo to El Barraco, which is not the hometown of Carlos Sastre, but it's where he spent a lot of his career based, and where he did a lot of his riding and training when he was in his peak, kind of a dozen or so years ago. So I think we've got to wait until next Saturday or Sunday before we can see whether there's going to be any more shake-up in the GC battle. The other thing I'll quickly say is that the heat is going to be extremely intense in the next few days. They're in Andalusia at the moment. They're staying there for a couple of days. Then they go into Extremadura, which is equally hot. It's going to be pretty brutal, I think, the next few days. So by the time we get to those stages next Saturday and Sunday, a lot of the guys are going to be probably quite literally fried.
Well, that's it for now. The Vuelta is shaping up to be a belter. But with Primož Roglič in the leader's jersey, you can never be 100% sure. Thanks to Pete and Sophie. Thanks to our sponsors at the Belgian Waffle Ride, of course. But most of all, thanks to you for listening. Until the next time, adios.
Via, via, vieni via di qui. Niente più ti lega a questi luoghi, neanche questi fiori azzurri.